Hello. Today we visit r/AskReddit to ask poor people who have dated rich people, what did you learn? Make sure to comment your Powerball numbers down below, and if you don't play the Powerball, ask me a question. I'll do my best to respond. With that, sit back and enjoy. My ex-wife had a grandfather that was a multi-millionaire. Christmas time at their house was like being in another world. All of the different family members would try to get a moment with the king and kissed ass as much as possible. I spent my time down on the ground playing with my kids and was happy to get out of there. About a week or two after the second Christmas, I got a phone call from Grandpa. He wanted to know what he could do for my family. I told him I didn't want any of his money, but I would like my kids to know their great-grandfather. Later that year, he showed up at our place unexpected and spent most of the afternoon telling stories with me about his youth. He set up a trust fund for each one of my kids to have their college paid for a little bit after that. He told me out of all of his in-laws, I was the only one that never asked him for anything but to be himself. That's probably the one big complication with having money. You never really know who likes you for you and who just wants money. Had some friends come into a large sum of money a while ago and I saw it firsthand. I liked this story. Sounds like both you and the grandfather were good people. It's so heartwarming for me. My dad has his own company and my mom works long hours even today. My stepbrother is a narcissistic egomaniac that would only comes around when he needed something. Long story short, my dad cut him out of the will. When my dad told me this, he was like, well, more for you. I look at my dad, said, I'd rather have you and mom around forever over all the money in the world. I learned just how productive having money can be. Something needs to be fixed or replaced. We can afford to. Want to do something fun or adventurous? Sure, let's do it now. Want to eat healthier? We can afford all the ingredients. Like, what do you mean your life isn't slowed down by a million different things that need fixing or upgrading or replacing or saved for? I worked for a rich couple for a while, and that was what made the biggest impression on me. If there was a problem, it was fixed. Simple as that. No hand-wringing about the cost, no sleepless nights wondering how they'd survive with this latest setback, no weeks or months of sacrificing to save up the money, no arguments over finances, no letting the problem get worse because we just can't afford to fix it right now, and no agonizing decisions about which bills we can pay this month and which we should ignore. If there was a problem, it was fixed and fixed well. Simple as ducking that. I'm not even jealous of how much money they had, just how well they must sleep at night compared to my poor ass. This is something I've realized about my own childhood. I never really considered my family wealthy because of course you don't see your normal life as special like that, but every time we ever had an issue of any kind, my parents just called someone to fix it immediately. I never mowed the lawn or vacuumed the floors, there were people to handle that. My dad said it was dumb for him to do handy projects around the house when he could just do some more work and use the money to hire an expert to do a better job. It makes a ton of sense, provided you make enough money. I'm now an adult with no useful handyman skills and I can't afford to get help when something breaks. Lol. Dated a man who didn't work, lived off of a trust fund. Oddly, since he could afford nearly anything, nothing had any value. He'd buy a $400 KitchenAid mixer and burn it up making Christmas candy the first week. If he decided to make more candy, he'd just go buy another $400 mixer. Nothing meant particularly anything to him. I'm just impressed someone broke a KitchenAid. I'm pretty sure that thing would win a fight versus my house's foundation. Edit. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on this brand of stand mixer. The one I bought for my household is a tank and has served us well since we got it. I was just trying to make a joke. I really don't care if they use plastic gears and not metal now, or if some other brand is even better. Mine fell off the counter onto a tiled floor after walking itself to the edge while working overtime on a quadruple batch of pizza dough. It broke a floor tile and just kept spinning, sideways on the floor. It still works great, years later. They're like the Nokia phone of stand mixers. The new ones have a self-destructing nylon gear in them that breaks if the mixer is misused. It costs maybe $10 and half an hour to replace them if you know what you're doing. In college, I used to buy broken KitchenAids for cheap, repair them and resell them for a few $100. How much easier it is to make money when you already have money. I once had a rich coworker find out I was pretty broke. I was working at a very fancy retreat as a student, so was surrounded by rich people working for fun. He told me to just buy a 3-bedroom house, live in one of the rooms and rent out the other 2. Just buy a house. Yeah, in college a friend and I were taking about not having money and another gal we knew overhead and said, just ask your parents. It never occurred to her that everyone didn't have rich parents. People born into money think they know what it's like to be middle class or poor, and sometimes even can make it sound convincing, but they honestly aren't even close to understanding. I've lived in 3 former meth labs as I grew up thinking McDonald's was treating myself. I worked 40 hours a week at a gas station while taking 21 credit hours at a public university. Now I'm a department lead engineer at a pharmaceutical company. When I hear the stories about all my GF's rich classmates in a prestigious MBA program going to Europe for studying, really just taking Molly and clubbing all night while the school pays for it, I cringe like hell. They get snobby about if a job makes less than 6 figures and imply that's low middle class. We're in the Midwest where that's upper middle class. How real the network, or bubble, of it is. It's like the other side from the "it's expensive being poor" concept. It's this weird internal community of people with money, and thus power, who are willing to make things happen as long as you're in. I mean, I would meet people at a fundraiser or something and 5 minutes later, they're happy to make a call that will get me a job at some huge firm. Or like, my then boyfriend would say, let's go to this concert. Tickets are $180 but it's okay, but a friend's parents have a box, so we'll just join them. Or even one time the dishwasher in our flat broke, but we didn't have to pay a dime for repairs, because his friend's parent owns the building, so they're fixing it for free as a favor. Yep, even having rich friends makes a difference, giving you access to that special network. I've learned this, and even though I'm the poor in our relationship, we are even now, but I have poverty brain. My fiancée was stunned to discover that there's networking on both sides of the tracks. Something breaks for her and she can't afford? Friends and family will take care of it. Something breaks for me? I've got buddies that can fix, find or sell for cheap said service or item. Sure, it's second-hand, dented or acquired, but it's a fix. My dad is a veterinarian in a small town in the middle of nowhere. He's not rich, because he charges low rates and markups. Mostly because he can't charge more than he thinks his clients can afford. He takes livestock, hay, services etc. for payment sometimes. He writes off and/or discounts for anyone that is struggling. So he really doesn't have a lot of money like veterinarians in larger towns or cities. But, when his hot water heater breaks, or his roof needs replaced, people show up to replace and repair his things. Sometimes people he doesn't know very well. He was just telling me this weekend, I don't know what I did for this guy, but he's doing me a huge favor. Networks are important. I wish I had one. My ex was having problems with roommates at university. Her parents bought a $300,000 condo for her to stay at while she finished her degree, 2 years. They sold it for a profit immediately after. I can't imagine not only being able to solve my problems with money, let alone make more off of them. She also assumed her family was lower middle class because she didn't live in a mansion like her friends. She was very humble and was smart with her money, but it was very clear she could just call her parents if something didn't work out. Meanwhile, my parents were struggling to pay rent, meaning I was their fallback. Not the other way around. Not a dating story, but it was eye-opening when I went to uni in the UK and some of the rich students bought their flats in Edinburgh just for their studies. One of these rich students was an amazingly sweet person, and since I couldn't afford to fly home for Christmas, she took me with her to her family's compound in Morocco, where they literally had servants that followed them around carrying silver platters of tea all day. Tell me more about Morocco. It was a culture shock in many ways, from their uber-rich grounds with armed guards to the streets outside where there was abject poverty everywhere you looked. We had to have a male chaperone every time we went into the city, but that didn't stop the local men from being disgusting pigs. Got either groped or a marriage proposal around every corner. My wife's family has no concept of what a workday is. To never have to open Workday again? Now that's the dream. They don't really have a concept of how rich they are. My ex-boyfriend was wealthy, but had a complex about how he was super poor. It was because all of his friends were also so wealthy, and he was maybe marginally less rich than some of them. He considered himself on the lower end of the scale. They don't really have a point of reference for how poor some people are. When we were together, I was living on a food budget of £50 a month, and he absolutely could not wrap his head around how a person could spend that little. I lived with a horrendously rich friend. His family are aristocracy in his home country. One thing I've noticed about him is that he's completely incapable of grasping that if I stop working, I just stop being able to eat. He was confused about why I was worried about taking a week off work, and didn't understand I was worried I'd lose money. He seemed to think that most people work because they choose to, because he's never had to work. Grew up poor, now middle class, and at 18 dated a super rich guy. First thing I noticed was the food. Not just quantities, but I also discovered so much food, like oyster, fresh fish, olives. Things my parents could never buy. I also had to learn etiquette. My parents brought me up well, I read books all the time, was a decent student and well-behaved kid. But the way his family interacted was so different. I had to learn a lot of unwritten rules that I wasn't aware of. I think in the end what I actually learned was that even though my childhood was rough, the amount of stress of not having enough money has probably impacted me for life. I valued my parents so much more. Once I had seen what life was like for rich people, I was just so proud of my family for making it work with so much less. I also had to learn etiquette. Yeah, this isn't mentioned enough, especially with old money. Weird things like how you place your silverware on the plate after finishing means different things. They can tell almost instantly you don't belong. I ate breakfast at a restaurant in Carmel, CA, and it felt like everyone in there was staring at me and subtly clearing their throats or shaking their heads over the way I was holding my silverware. I was solid upper middle class at the time, income-wise. I felt like a peasant. Just made me realize how expensive being poor is. They never have debt, never need to look at their balance to see if they can buy food, never pay interest on overdue bills, etc. Oh, the really rich have a ton of debt. But they have so much money and assets that they borrow that money for peanuts. Their actual cash is invested in ways that makes them much more money than their debts costs them. Want to buy a $5 million house? Borrow $5 million and the interests on your $100 million in assets will cover the loan easily. Spent first 8 years of my adult life with a woman whose parents had money. She had no conception of how hard life could be if you couldn't just sell stocks to buy a new car, or have someone give you a couple thousand to put you up in a new place. She pocketed her paycheck every 2 weeks. When we went out, I paid for gas. I bought dinner. Didn't think much about it at the time because we were engaged. When we broke up, she had $30,000 in her savings account and I was broke. Growing up with money is like hitting every green light and not having to worry about traffic jams. And it really ducks with your ability to empathize with people. With that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching all the way until the end, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment your Powerball numbers down below, and if you don't play the Powerball, ask me a question. I'll do my best to respond. If you want to continue to watch my content, click the video on screen now. Until next time.